Yeah, but we were the
And
only people on the bus, so I mean, I didn't know what the hell to do at that point. What do you do? What do you do?
well, you make sure that you pull that oyster from your sock and you toss it out the window because Earl, shouldn't have done that.
Dude, it's the only oyster I had.
Welcome to the Trampled Underfoot podcast show. Your hosts are Mark Lindsay and Eloy Escajedo, and we're live coming at you. Boy, I had to fill in the blank real quick with that one,
I know.
and I was finding something to. So I pictured a bus, and I don't know what the hell happened there.
Before we get started here, I just want to say Robin has a suggestion: Dr. Pepper, strawberries, and cream. Is this the first time you've been pregnant, Robin? Work with the medication, not against it. Your day's going to go a lot smoother. There, we discussed it. What's going on in Miami, man? What's happening?
Well, um, boy, what's going on in Miami? I'd have to go and check, and I haven't done that for a while. I'd have to actually creak open the old Venetian, and look through, and and put my hands up like that at the glare that's breaking through the rays of the sun to figure that one out.
I know what you mean. Guys in our group that we hang out and BS with one another, we call Eloy a hermit because he basically barricades himself in the compound there. But I got to say, man, I can't be teasing you too bad because walking to the curb to get the wheelie bin, the garbage dumpster after the garbage people have dumped it, and bringing it back up the driveway is getting to be an excursion.
Yeah.
It's getting to be, that's about the limits of my adventure if I can get away with it. you know Take out the garbage can, let the magic men come and empty it, and then bring it back, and that's it. I don't want to go any further if I
How
can
does that
avoid it.
song go? Take out the oysters and the trash.
Something like that. The world is your oyster. So
Yeah, nothing much. Nothing much around here. Just just living the life, living la vida.
uh-huh. Okay,
How
okay.
about for yourself?
Oh man, it's been a weird week. Got some work done out in the shop. Getting ready to do some more work tomorrow. But I got taken down a rabbit hole that for me is a little bit odd. Now, you will probably go, "What?" I mean, I'd have thought you'd have been into all over that. Um, I get these odd suggestions on my YouTube watch list, and for those that don't know, I don't watch TV. The last TV show I watched was an episode of Antiques Roadshow about 4 years ago. I just don't watch TV.
Let me just interject a sentence.
Mhm.
I have been lately watching Antiques Roadshow shows on PBS channel online. So it's
It's it's
continue
it,
and like
it's it's
recently,
it's awesome, isn't it?
I freaking love it.
Yeah. I mean, well, we're both history buffs. So there's that aspect of it. And just seeing what these things are, what they used to be used for, or what they are used for even today, and just figure out, geez, what's that worth? Diddly squat. That's what that's worth. But um, a video came up that probably is of no interest to anybody but me and possibly my wife. And what it was obviously home video that was shot in Germany in the late 80s. And it was this family walking around in Berlin. And you can picture the scene. Dad's got the VHS camcorder on his shoulder, and you can see it's the not so good zooming and panning and everything. And it's totally amateur. He just somehow got it transferred digitally onto the computer so he could post it up on YouTube. And they're on the west uh, German side, and then they go up to checkpoint Charlie, and then the camera shuts off. Then they're on the East German side, and they're doing. He's doing various shots of their World War II memorial, and um, getting shots of the Brandenburg Gate, which you couldn't see most of because it was on the East German side of the wall.
Right.
But then you go, so I watched that and it was kind of interesting. They walking around in town and everything. Well, it turns out there are four parts to this video on this guy's channel, and part two was suggested. So I said, okay, this was cool. Let me watch it. So I put it on and I'm watching it. And it turns out what's going on is these people had absolutely no clue that they were there while the Berlin Wall was coming down. They didn't watch TV. They don't speak German. Why would they?
Right.
So they got their dinner and they went on into the hotel and they went to bed, not paying attention to the news. But you've seen that you've seen that news footage of the people up on the wall chipping away at it with hammers and waving flags and all this other kind of
I
stuff.
saw it live when it was happening
Yeah.
on TV.
These people had no way of knowing they were about 8 blocks away from all that happening while they were going to bed. So the next morning, they go to the Berlin Zoo and could not figure out why the train station was as empty as it was. And they were practically the only people walking around the Berlin Zoo. And they spent quite a bit of time there. Then they come out of the zoo and they're going to go to this other part of the park, and they happen to go past Checkpoint Charlie, and they see that the gates, lift up and people come in from the East German side and it closes. And then almost the minute that barrier drops, it comes back up and the guy drives, closes, guy drives, not checking papers, not checking nothing. And while they're standing there, all of a sudden the barrier goes up and it just stays there. And people are walking.
They
And
caught
people are
that on
driving through. Yeah. And dad's watching and he's like, what's going on? What's happening?
they caught
What's
that on
going
film.
on? Yeah. And people are gathered around and folks are coming out of the East German side, coming out of East Berlin, and they're walking around and guys are driving in their little trobbies, looking around at, oh, wow, this is the West and things like that. And they finally figure it out some hours later that basically the wall is coming down and it's over. And I think this was in part 3 that they finally figured it out. And then part 4, they're walking around and, looking at people partying and reveling and everything. And it was just strange to see it from that aspect.
Yeah, family vacation or whatnot.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're in the middle of something historic without realizing that that's what's happening. It's just a massive case of what the, did you see that? Kind of a thing. So
It's an incredible thing, yeah.
that really sucked me in. And of course, when that happens,
But there was no zombies in it because I'm doing that
no
for Greg.
zombies,
Oh,
no
you see?
vampires, no mummies, no lizard people. I don't think the Beatles were there.
What? Do not.
But I
first of-
can't. I can't. I'll never say never.
wash your mouth out with palm olive when you talk of the Beatles in that fashion.
Yeah.
do me, yourself, and the rest of humanity there, Greg, a favor and do extra thick palm olive with a bristle brush when you talk about the Beatles in such terms.
Yeah. like Linda says, we were living in Germany while all that was going down, and that's true. We were several hundred miles away, way off to the west. But and where we were, it was looked at completely differently. And in fact, Linda and I were talking about it at dinner this evening when it became official and the Germany's reunified. It was at what hour of the evening? It was after dark, and it was official. The Germany's had reunified. There was now one Germany. One firework got launched out over the Rhine, and that was it. That was it. At that hour, boom, that was the celebration. Now we're way off to the west where a lot of people weren't really affected by it. Whereas in Berlin, people were just going nuts because the wall was basically down at that time. There were no more checkpoints or anything like that. All the concertina wire was gone, and but they still had fences around. They called it the strip of death. There was like a 100-meter wide sand buffer zone that in some places there were landmines. So they still had fences around that while they went through and cleared all that out. And they hope they got them all. But that was 900 miles of wall they had to take down. So it was a mess for quite some time.
Incredible.
But along with that recommendation came another video of a by a British guy who does a lot of travel videos. And he was a soldier stationed in Germany during the Cold War. And he talked about the trip, the whole ordeal, if you wanted to drive from West Germany through this one corridor that was allowed by the Soviet Union to drive into Berlin and all of the checkpoints you had to go through. It was like a 109-mile trip, but you spent about 4 hours at each end going through procedures for that trip. And it's about a 38-minute long video. It was really cool, really interesting to me. And he retraced that trip just a couple of years ago and shot footage of the old stations, the old checkpoints, and everything else, and what they've been converted to, and all this other good stuff. But it was really eye opening and very nostalgic for me from being over there. And I used to drive bus for USO tours along the East German border in one area and always wanted to go over. So when the wall came down, we went. And I've told you about that trip, and we've talked about it on the podcast. But it was really an intriguing thing to get to see it now, because we left Germany. Oh gosh, it's coming up on 30 years ago. We left Germany and haven't been able to go back. And to see what it looks like now is really, really something cool.
And that's on YouTube?
That is on YouTube. The family that posted their videos, the American family, visiting Berlin during the fall of the wall. And they edited it into one complete video. Oh, okay, cool. It's a little over an hour long, this complete video. But I will post a link to their YouTube channel over on the Trampled Underfoot podcast Facebook page, because it was very, very cool. Um, but it's a series of 4 videos, but then they also have a video that's all 4 of them edited together. And then the gentleman who posted the video of driving uh, uh, transit to West Berlin across the Iron Curtain in the 1980s during the Cold War. I'll post a link to his YouTube channel. He does a lot of travel videos as well. And he spends a lot of time going through and going to these places, World War II and Cold War historic sites, in the UK and in continental Europe. So all the checkpoints of Berlin then and now, and things like that. And it was a really cool series. At least it was interesting to me. So, but that got me then onto another thing.
I guess you'll post your videos, the ones that you watched, later in the Trampled Underfoot podcast page on Facebook.
Yes, I will. I'm going to post all that as soon as we're done live here. I'll post all that over on Facebook.
Okay.
That led me to 2 other YouTube channels. One of them is kind of vloggy guy. He's I don't know. I'm kind of yes and no about this guy. The channel is called Jack Sucks at Geography, and he does a lot of talks on flags and borders, and trying to find interesting things about countries. It's pretty cool. I'll go ahead and I'll link him as well. But there's one that you would like, I think. This guy calls himself. His name is Tim. He calls himself the Tim Traveler, a play on time traveler. He's not a
Mhm.
time traveler. He's the Tim Traveler. Have you ever heard of the Spanish enclave of Yivia?
Gibeah?
Yivia, double Livia.
No.
It's an enclave between in France, but it's a Spanish enclave that was made in the late 15 or early 1600s, and it's about I guess about 7 miles across the Spanish border, but it's in France, but it's part of Spain.
Okay.
And he talks about that enclave and the neutral road in between the two, and how there was the stop sign war. And if you Google the stop sign war, you'll find the story about it. But it's basically France and Spain had an argument about which way stop signs should have faced, and it was actually pretty good.
That's
So
interesting. I didn't know that.
yeah, it's some pretty cool stuff. I wouldn't have known that there were any Spanish enclaves in France at all. I just happened to stumble across and said, I got to show this to Ela.
With all that you've said, and we've talked about it before, but YouTube itself is a sort of, well, the internet itself,
Mm-hmm.
although we're talking about videos that have a specific thing, so it applies to YouTube, and it applies to the internet as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a grand library
Mm-hmm.
that's not so you have to do some fiddling around, like when you like if you're looking for something specific, um that's very specific. um you could run into the issue where you have to dig through other things in order to arrive at whatever you're looking for.
Right.
um so it's kind of it's kind of like a library that's sort of organized. It's kind of like a mall library where there's many stores within the structure, and each store has there's particulars, but there's also little kiosk booths along the way, and you're just roaming the halls of that like mall. um and the information is scattered about. Sometimes it's kind of like that in a way, kind of like a big
Mm-hmm.
like a flea market, maybe even better.
Yeah.
um and so there are things like, okay, so just since you're saying that,
Mm-hmm.
um which I think this is a good like launch point for something, maybe not, but so if you guys out there think of your lives throughout the, you know let's start with the 80s, because or 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s, and so on, or beyond that. If you think of your lives and all the events and all the things and all the places you experienced, there were other people that shared adjacent your experiences adjacent to you, coming from their own homes across your towns and cities and whatnot, visited the same locations, the same whatever. um and the further back you go, the less and less home film items exist out there,
Mm-hmm.
although they existed wildly, um to the point where there is a lot. But my point is this: I've been trying to, like, for instance, um I'll give you an example. So I basically grew up hanging out at the mall, the Miami International Mall, which is just 2 miles away from here.
Uh-huh.
Because my mom in the 80s, my mom worked at Jordan Marsh, up up on the second floor in the housewares department.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, especially during summer, instead of leaving me at home, especially when I was younger, she'd take me to the mall, and I could go roam around the mall, but come back.
Hmm.
I'd have to come back, and every whatever the time frame was, to let her know that I was okay, so she wouldn't worry.
Right.
She would let me loose out in the mall, and the mall was like this huge playground,
Hmm.
and the iconic places were, well, the arcade place, the
Hmm.
bookstores, the record stores, and then they had odds and ends that were pretty cool as well.
Yeah.
So I would roam around. um, there is no footage that I've been able to acquire of the International Mall from the 1980s. It opened like in 81 or 82, something like that, the mall did.
Right.
And it's been a staple here. And it was one of the great malls until the new mall came along.
Hmm.
Now we have two malls. It's incredible. And I've been trying my darndest to find actual footage from the 80s so that I can visual. Now there is some little clips
Hmm.
that there are some little tiny clips, depending on the reporters what they were doing, but there's nothing just like good chunk you could take a bite
Hmm.
out of and enjoy the nostalgia of my specific thing. Now with that said, um well, no, I mean that's basic. Well, no, I'll add this. The other part is that there are people that started documenting things, and I've run across things like people that document for whatever reason. Maybe they were doing it for their job. I don't know what the but they document elevators in malls. Like that's their whole gig. That's
Hmm.
and how it functions and what the model is. And so through that, I was able to see, at least from the 90s, some footage inside Sears at my
Yeah.
local mall. So it's kind of weird how that. Well, any thoughts on all that?
Yes. And let's see if you agree. Let me throw up Jim Dockerell's comment here. Bald and Bankrupt channel has several tours through old Soviet country. Not lately, though. Yes, for obvious reasons. My wife watches his videos. People like him and like the Tim Traveler, they're able to do these explorations on a grander scale, where they could go to other countries or they can go to other districts that are fairly close to their own. Whereas we, you and me, for instance, we don't really have the opportunity to go do that.
Right. Yeah.
But we have become explorers in our own right. And basically backyard archaeologists and researchers in our attempts to find those things.
I've
It's
got a jungle already.
well, it's no, yeah. Well, you could Indiana Jones out of the out of the yard if you want. Just watch out for that rolling ball the neighbors have set up. Okay, uh, but but yeah, in your explorations to try to find images or any kind of footage of the inside of that mall from back there in the day, Lord knows how much footage is out there. I mean, I remember as a kid walking around with my movie camera, excuse me, and then later on with the video camera. I wasn't the only person out there with a camcorder. There were camcorders all over the place. And they shifted from the old VHS on your shoulder type to the little 8 millimeter handheld. Then we got down to digital. Then everybody has a phone. But there is footage out there somewhere. It's just, where is it? There, and we have become the researchers that are trying to gather that all up and put it together individually. I mean, these were home movies. This guy over in East Germany and West Germany, just there on vacation when the Berlin Wall came down. And in fact, in one segment of that video, they're standing there looking at the Brandenburg Gate, and all of a sudden you hear somebody off camera speaking English. And if you listen in, you hear him say, but authorities in the West are don't know how much longer the East Germany can stand. And then he says his name, ABC News. And dad zooms out, and there is a reporter there with a microphone in his hand, wearing the suit. He has a clipboard and a cameraman there. And he's like, did that guy just say he was from ABC News? And they kind of pan over. They're trying to be polite. They're not trying to get up in his face or anything. But that guy was from ABC News. And this is before they knew any of this was going on.
What were they doing in East Germany anyhow?
You could go over and just there was a certain little area in East Berlin that foreigners were welcome to come with the proper permits and passes and all this other good stuff. And they had all their quote unquote special stores there where you could go buy Russian this and East German that and things from the Soviet bloc, trying to get that Western money. And people did go. A lot of West Germans would go over to visit family in the East. But they faced more scrutiny than, say, an American or a Brit who had a military tie would face.
Yeah.
And so you could go as a tourist, and people did go as a tourist. We never did. It was just too far to drive.
There's a
But
lot of. Go ahead.
But the whole thing about that is we have become kind of the amateur chroniclers and the amateur explorers and the amateur archaeologists, if you will. I mean, you turned me on to that channel, Defunct Land, where he started off by just going to these old amusement parks or closed areas in amusement parks that are still operating and kind of looking at the abandonment and the decay. And now he's not the only one doing that. There are several YouTube channels out there dedicated to it. And there are TV series now that my wife watches on cable, Mysteries of the Abandoned, where they go to these abandoned places.
Yeah.
And are shooting, full scale documentaries about this stuff. And it all happens because a couple of mopes like you and me decided we wanted to check it out and see what this is, And I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Because not only are we exploring, but we're documenting those explorations. And you're not the only person looking for the International Mall in the 70s and 80s. You're not the only person out there wishing they had some footage. So, I guess what I'm trying to finally work my way around to is if you guys out there have old 8mm video, if you have old VHS tapes of this stuff, get it digitized and put it up on YouTube. You're not the only one interested in that.
Well, there's also another side to that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, two things. One, Germany and that historical scenario is not unlike Cuba's situation generally for the same political reasons, roughly
Mm-hmm.
thereabouts,
Yeah.
ideologic and political reasons. Where the first generation of Cubans that exited due to political unrest and this and
Mm-hmm.
that left and are called the exile community, the Cuban exile community, and they would not do as many. I'm sure there's an equivalent for the Germans that never, due to they were the ones that lost X, Y, and Z during
Mm-hmm.
the initial takeover, respectively.
Mm-hmm.
Those people do not uh, consent to returning for any reason whatsoever. And that's the community that I'm a part of, or
Mm-hmm.
that my parents were from, and I'm a part of,
Mm-hmm.
by sheer closeness of it. They refused
Right.
to return and inject
Mm-hmm.
fuel into the system that robbed them of
Right.
its liberty and so on and so forth. However, it's unrealistic to a certain degree when people are suffering. So fundage did go
Mm-hmm.
as best as it could in order to supplement people with medicines and all these
Right.
things. But the governments then realized a opportunity, and so anything coming in, they took a chunk off of to X degree, and many people, well,
Hmm.
that's been one of the gigs filtering through.
Right.
Um, the other part is that um, people are documenting unbeknownst to them as they go through, like you were saying, the last thing you said. Um, the only issue that we have with this wild west of the internet is that um, not everybody documents for easy tracing down. For instance, like all of us have a lot of albums, and in many cases, the albums and the photos in the albums are photos without like at least something in the back saying this is Aunt so and so, this
Right.
is Uncle so, and so 100 years later, you pick up the photograph, you look at all these people, you know you're related to them,
Right.
you have no freaking idea what's going on in the
Yep.
photo, so it becomes one of these things where there it is. I don't know
Yeah.
what's going. So it's important also to detail as best as possible the things that one does have to forward it to the next generation for people that are
Right.
looking to sort of like finger through all the files and details and so on and so forth. So there's that issue too. But all things considered, the internet is such a great tool to investigate so many things that it's just
Yeah.
so the good of it is there's that those
Right.
shortcomings are what they are.
Well, you can only detail that you know, and I mean, you simply can't talk about what you don't know. Like Greg has just said, he just digitized some old 8 millimeter movie films of his motorcycle club races from the 1930s. I wonder how many people are around who know names, who know backstories about those races. Now, if it's from the 1930s, we're getting close on 100 years ago. So I'm guessing that the number of people who were around when those races are being run is pretty small. But um, somebody knows something. Oh, that was my grandpa. Oh, that was my uncle Steve. Oh, that was cousin Fred. Getting as much context as you can is important, but
Yeah,
you can't know everything. And I'm with you in that because I've got 3 totes of family photos over here, and I'll pick up a picture and I have no idea who I'm looking at. I can kind of try to figure out, well, gee, was that looks kind of sort of like cousin Fred. I'm going to put it over here in that folder. But I have to rely on other relatives to kind of, oh no, no, that's got nothing to do with Uncle Fred. This is Aunt Virginia. Oh, okay.
yeah.
So,
There's whole so on that level of like personal family photos and so on, but going also back to the documentation thing about like videos and internet.
mhm,
um there's all this footage and stuff out there. There's one channel that which you saw because I remember us talking about it, and it was cool enough that we were engaged on it, where it's like some 1930s video of a car being filmed
mm,
as it drives down the New York streets
it was, yeah, it was
with
like
everybody with
1910 or 1911, something like that. Yeah.
something like that, and everybody was sitting well dressed. There was the
Hmm.
lady with probably the umbrella, if I recall well,
Hmm.
and they had it was the whole thing, and so the video was always around, but nobody knew who the people in it were.
Hmm.
This one guy, the same guy that did my review video of my genealogy
Yeah.
or my DNA thing, which is I think he's called a genie blogger,
Yes.
and he went and researched and found out the names of the people, the stories and lives of the people of that in that film.
Hmm.
So there is possibilities in many cases there's not, but um, the film was out there on the internet.
Hmm.
This one guy took that
Yeah.
interest, and so
Well,
a mystery was. Go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, his audience got him to go look. Well, you got all these research.
Yeah,
capabilities and you have all these connections. Can you track down who this family is riding in this car? Because it was a camera set up on a streetcar and they were following this streetcar.
that's right.
And the car would, it would get closer and it would back away and get, as they were driving down the road, and you could see the license plate on that car. And using the information that he got just out of watching that video, it is like you said, he identified all the people in the car, he identified the family, the driver, and what this guy did, who these people were. And actually, it was really, really cool the way he did that.
He did a great job on it.
Fabulous job. On a related note, and that's where you and I come in, and everybody in the chat listening. Audiences can sometimes drive these people. A good example is this guy who calls himself the Tim Traveler. I was telling you about the Spanish enclave in France and the neutral road running between it. I watched a video just before you came into the green room that he did, talking about a border incident that was in the news, like in 2021, I believe it was, that it made the news. Yes. Um, early 2021, it made the news. Supposedly, what happened was a farmer used his tractor, a Belgian farmer used his tractor to move a border stone and actually moved the border between France and Belgium. And a whole bunch of his audience put him onto the story through Twitter and said, "This is something that you'd be interested in. This is right up your alley." And he said, "Well, you're absolutely right." So he went to that town. He found all the newspaper articles about it. He went to that town and he started tracking down the story. He found the stone. The mayor of that town said, "Yes, that stone is in the wrong place. We don't know who moved it." The newspaper story said it was a Belgian farmer who was mad because that stone was in the way. He couldn't get his tractor through. Well, this guy did a little bit of research and he went there and he found the stone. There's a photo of him sitting on it. You couldn't get a tractor through there anyway. It was right at the edge of some woods. Then the story locally became, well, no, he moved that stone with his tractor to make his field bigger. Well, then the guy tracked down the owner of the property, who was Belgian, the Belgian owner of the property, and he's not even a farmer. He's a retired veterinary doctor. He doesn't know how it happened, doesn't know how it moved. Because he didn't even know that there was a border stone there. So he went back and he traced it a little bit, talked to the mayor of this town and all this other good stuff. And basically what it was one newspaper reporter got two interviews a little bit confused. They found that the stone was in the wrong place. They didn't know how it happened. The mayor of the town, the former mayor at the time, said it weighs, like 300 pounds. Somebody would have had to push it with a tractor.
Yeah.
Well, one reporter took those two things, mashed it all together, and came up with the story that a Belgian farmer moved that border stone with his tractor because he couldn't get his tractor through. And that story went worldwide. So the whole thing never happened. Yes, they agree the stone's in the wrong place, but it's been there for decades. They have no idea how it got moved, or even if it was moved, and just better surveying techniques have put the border here and, oh, this stone is there. It should go over here, actually.
Yeah.
So, it stuff like that happens all the time. But without people to document this, it would still have gone on. That old story would have still gone on.
Yeah.
you know. So I think that the amateur, quote unquote, archaeologist or explorer has a lot of value because it's getting the unwritten history out there and putting it on the record. You
Yeah,
know.
yeah. A lot of things do get confused and watered down until it's a shadow of itself as time moves forward. And like, as much as I've compiled as an example, and we talked about this the other day when we were talking about like um, a virtual you online, let's
Yeah.
say, and you
Hmm.
input it all the things that your desires, your
Hmm.
shortcomings, and all that. No matter how much one documents, like for instance, in my case, like documenting my parents and grandparents and this, um, it falls short of the completeness of and meaningfulness of them as people.
Right.
So the best that we can do is a snapshot of the things that one the way one recalls it.
Yeah.
But there's always shortcomings, and the further back in time, like in some cases there's written accounts of wars back in ancient
Hmm.
times, and they talk about like countless amounts of soldiers, but like huge numbers that they figured out there could never have been that amount of soldiers on those battlefields due
Right.
to population in the areas
Hmm.
historically, um, the amount of horses that would have been required and food supply, just a bunch of things. And so these battles were in some cases much smaller, but they were grand to them at the time because you know what I'm saying. I mean, all
Yeah.
you need is three or four people ganging up on you, and by the time you get out of it, and your friend asks, you'll say it was like 30 people.
Oh
So
yeah.
things expand in ways that, but the essence of the fact that there was a battle and so on, even though the details fall by the some details that are important fall by the wayside, we still have a marker that gives us something happened in that place and it was to do with a war and there were horses, and but some things may not be necessarily accurate. So I mean, you know what I'm saying. So detail in some cases may not be possible, but we have a general sort of idea of
Well,
what occurred in certain instances.
yeah, we may know that something happened, but we really don't have an accurate idea of what or when or who or we know where roughly. But yeah, because things do get blown out of proportion because remember the history is usually written by the victor. It's very rarely is it written by the loser of the war because generally speaking they're not there to do much writing. Um, but with that in mind, things do get embellished and things do get blown out of proportion. Did you ever read when you was a kid? Did you ever read or have it read to you the Dr. Seuss book? And to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street,
I don't remember.
a
I
kid
read
who
Dr. I read Dr. Seuss, but I don't remember the
it's
details.
about a kid who saw a horse pulling a wagon down Mulberry Street. And in his mind, he starts conjuring up all these things. It was four horses pulling a wagon with a band in it. Or no, maybe it was the horse with the wagon with the mayor and a band walking behind. Or no, wait, maybe there was a huge brass band leading the horse and wagon with the governor and the mayor in another buggy back behind. And pretty soon he's got this big old long parade with airplanes and balloons and people cheering and all this other stuff in his brain. And then finally, when he's asked, "So what did you do? What did you see today on your way home from school?" There was so much stuff running around in his brain he couldn't think of where to begin. So he said, "Oh, nothing, just a horse and buggy on Mulberry Street."
Yeah,
So he had blown it so out of proportion in his head he didn't know where the hell to begin, where to start, where to stop.
yeah,
You know, well, how many so-called historians have done the same thing? You
yeah.
know, because
There's lots of information out there.
everything is relative. If you're a farmer out working the field and you see four wagons go by at once and that you've never seen that happen before, as far as you're concerned, that's an army. And if 100 soldiers over here and 100 soldiers over here meet, clash, 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 one side loses, that could be the biggest battle you've ever seen. And if you're writing about it, that could easily become a million.
Yeah, and there's also the political insistence of, you know,
Yes.
showing, that hey, we have the numbers and so on and so forth. And
Yeah.
I will take not necessarily much of an issue, but maybe a clarification um, for like Europe.
Hmm.
Europe, the continent that it is, involves many different nations,
Hmm.
and at one point or another, each nation or principality, prior to it being a nation necessarily, had conflicts with its neighbors
Hmm.
and battles with its neighbors, and they all documented whether they won or lost.
Hmm.
And so, history in that scenario is written by everyone, regardless of winning and losing. So I'm not too keen. Maybe the better way to say it, in my opinion, is um, according to the country, um,
There,
they will write it in such a way that they're the winners.
there's a lot of truth in that, but even let's go to Europe and let's say the Napoleonic Wars, the history of the Napoleonic Wars were written by people after those wars happened and after Napoleon was exiled. So even though Napoleon won the battles, he lost the war and was exiled, and they were written by the people who exiled him. Now
No,
the Brits are taught on the
no,
Napoleonic
but
Wars
hold
from
on.
their side. Go ahead.
Hold on. For the documentation of the era
Yeah,
was happening. What was I going to say?
it is happening in real time, and it's written at in real time.
Right. So you don't have maybe someone writing the history in a one consumable book, uh, but all all parties with whatever biases that they had at the time,
Okay,
were engaged in documentation. So you
right.
know, so it's more accurate to say if you're British, you
Okay,
defeated the French. Wouldn't you
okay.
say that that's more accurate? Like, if you're
Yes.
British in your books, you defeated, but you still explain the issues that occurred as it unfold. So I don't know about this
Okay,
idea of
so I was wrong in saying that history is written by the victors,
it's a common
but I
saying
but I'm right in saying that history is taught by the victors.
in their respective countries.
Yes,
Yeah. So if you're the country that lost,
because well, even in Germany, they are not taught from the Nazi perspective. They are taught from the Allied perspective. Okay, in World War One of the things that led up to World War II was they were taught from the Kaiser's perspective, the loser's perspective, and that and the Treaty of Versailles. Let's make no mistake, the Treaty of Versailles started World War II. It started World War II. But because the Germans were taught from the losing side, it fueled the fire that the Treaty of Versailles started and kept flames and kept intensifying flames. Then we
well, they
had World
were.
War II.
Well, wait a second, but they were. So look,
But then World War II came along and history was written and taught by the victors.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't see it that way. I mean, I understand that that's a
Well,
common.
we
I
we
understand. Well, let me
we,
say a thing about
we may be talking semantics, but go ahead.
no, but it depends on. So if you're saying World War II, you know, there is a definite good side and bad side, at least from
Hmm.
the Western perspective.
Hmm.
This encompasses a whole history of different nations with specific battles, specific situations, and so on.
Sure.
There's documentation on all of it, but
Hmm.
conclusion being that the Germans, the Nazis, did X, Y, and Z to people,
Hmm.
and so on. But we still get the atomic bomb, what
Hmm.
occurred. We still have what you would call revisionist people that sit and say, "Well, wait a second." By the time there's people that argue, by the time that it came to it, the Japanese were about to fold, and yet the bombs were dropped. So there's critiques and so on. So it's I don't see it as so for the general public taught in school in their respective countries, um, irrespective of world or of something like World War II or World War One, where there was like everybody was involved, and there's clear left, one side or the other
Hmm.
side. Um, Smaller situations, maybe almost just as brutal, are not delineated as there's enough information out there. In school, you sit and you get a basic situation
Yeah.
from from your respective country, and your
Yeah.
shortcomings are roughly minimized, and your successes are roughly maximized
And that's
because there is a um
and that's
incentive in well, dude, go ahead. I'm
well,
trying to go ahead.
but you got to get there. But that's exactly what I'm trying to say. That's exactly what I mean. The the war for independence is not taught from the British angle. It's taught from the American perspective. The victors wrote that history. Now, yes, there is other history. There was a British perspective. There was the Crown's version of what happened, but you were never taught that in school until maybe you got to college level and they did it as an intellectual enterprise, but that can't undo everything you were taught from kindergarten on up to the 12th grade. And it's the same thing no matter where you are. The French Revolution is not taught from the perspective of the kings to the citizens of France. It's taught from the perspective of the other side, the victorious side. That was a black stain on the entire country. So I'm not sure how it is taught, because when you start chopping off people's heads, then somebody gets mad at you and chops off your head. It's hard to say that it was a success one way or another. But what I'm getting at is that history, while it is written by many people, more often than not, it is taught from the side, from the aspect of the victor, especially if that was your side.
In their
You know,
respective country.
right?
You have
In
to
Japan.
add you have to add that because if the war concluded
Hmm.
and you're sitting in, I don't know, whatever country X, and you were the ones that failed, you're gonna
Hmm.
see. I mean, we're saying generally speaking,
Right.
you could either a cover it up, or minimize it to make it to shrink it to a point where it's not going to cripple the narrative of the country in order to maintain the because the at the end of the day what it is population. They're more, it's more than that, but populations within a given geographic border are, it's the lifeblood of said political head of that country because
Hmm.
it feeds through taxes due to the production that the citizenry produce, and you want there to be some sort of glue
Well, sure.
at the level of the country.
Oh,
So you want to accentuate success and patriotism in a general
right.
sense, and
And
minimize. Go ahead.
they do that by exalting how what they have become, and that maybe that was a mistake, and those people are gone. And now here's our glorious new future. because this is what we have become. So, yes, you have to inspire patriotism, you have to inspire pride, because if you don't, you're going to stagnate and collapse even further. And we've seen that in some places around the world through history where they just sat in the corner and licked their wounds, which left them wide open to invasion by other people.
But
So,
I want to get back to the um I'm not too harsh on or too strict on, although that's a common saying,
mhm,
and it's something that's a standard saying. And my I take issue with the victors write the history. I
mhm,
take issue because it's more nuanced than that. And what people usually do when it's one of these, I don't want to call it a trope, but it's kind of one of these um, bedrock sayings that's supposed to tidy it all up, tie it in a knot, and call it done in terms of just all the concepts. And for the average person, maybe um, they're gonna attach a lot of assumptions to that, and people can live a whole lifetime. It's their problem to do so, but they can live a whole lifetime assuming a bunch of things that are completely bogus under a terminology that. And I'm not saying that you're doing that. It is a shortcut to get to the point of it, which is I think we agree on that the country will teach their successes and sort of minimize
mhm,
but we
yeah,
need to. But if you're conscientious about accuracy, we need to also um well, we don't need to do anything, but I need to, or I find it useful to also look at these little dark recesses or cuts into the alleyway of the history of our country and peek in and see what's going on there. Now sometimes looking down those hallways, um, one's like, ooh,
yeah.
depending on what the topic is, one's like, whoa, and one retreat. And I do that. You retreat a little bit and you say, okay, there's something there, but I'm going to go ahead. But I generally, if I'm interested enough in that and doing that particular study, will actually walk down that alleyway because we have to look. There has to be, regardless of the monsters lurking, there has, well, there doesn't have to be, but I assume that there's redeeming there's something redeeming even in the face of these things that are not kosher in terms of what we expect from ourselves within the country.
Okay. I agree with a lot of what you said, but you're also talking about specialist study when you get into that. When you've
Yeah.
got 4 weeks to learn all of World War II, you ain't got, there's no way you can do it. I mean, they can't do that in junior high school
No.
modern history.
No. Not
You
even
have to
after.
be interested enough to take the deep dive. And that's where we get around to us being modern day archaeologists, sociologists, and explorers. Because you're right, there are a lot of corridors to go down. And maybe you go down one end of the hallway and decide, ooh, let me back off of that. That's not to say that somebody else isn't going to be intrigued as heck and explore that. And that's where a lot of this is coming from, because we wouldn't even know that corridor existed if somebody hadn't pushed that door open a little bit.
That's right.
And that's why I'm talking about all of these people, everybody exploring today, yesterday, tomorrow has value. And
Yeah.
all of that documentation that you have, whether you know it or not. I mean, this family was just on vacation and shooting video and had no idea that they were standing in the midst of history as it was unfolding all around them. They became a part of that history, and their home movies are part of the documentation of that history. Because you have, I mean, they're standing right there with that camera watching people go through who have never seen the West before, except maybe from a fifth floor looking over the wall, if they got that close. Because that's one of the other little things that the East German government did. You see all these building facades and facing West Berlin, right there by the wall. Those with windows Nobody lived in those apartments. And modern apartments had no windows that faced west of Berlin because they didn't want the people to see it. The windows that were there were either boarded up, painted up, or they were used by the Stasi as for surveillance. There were people that would go into those apartments and everything, but they worked for the secret police and they were watching West Germany. Just little things like that. Well, we wouldn't know that if somebody hadn't gone in there and reported on it and somehow got the information out. So all of this has value. Every
Yeah.
single part
Yeah.
of it. I mean, there is somebody in West Germany who didn't know these guys in that car got through. And it's like, holy cow, that was cousin Franz. He's in West Germany somehow. So I know he made it out. That kind of thing. There may be the reunification of a family member in the background of one of these home movies. There could be any. I mean, we talked about that before, some of the weird stuff that happens in shower thoughts and what have you. That one photo in Disney World where a woman as a young girl was with her family, and in the background is a boy with his family. Her dad has taken a picture of her and her mom and sister, and the boy's dad has taken a picture of him and his mom. And 15 years later, those two meet, fall in love, and get married, and realize when they go meet each other's parents that, holy cow, that's me in the background of your photo.
Yeah. I've seen
It's
something like that. Yeah.
it's just weird little things. So all of this history that we can put online, and everybody here has a YouTube channel. Get your Super 8 movies and VHS tapes, put them up online. I mean, obviously, if it's too personal, don't put it up. But I mean, if you went to
Put it
if
all online.
if you
Put it
went
all online,
if
baby.
you went to Miami to the International Mall in the 1970s or 80s, put that video up on YouTube. Because right now from listening to us right here, somebody else is interested. And he's
Honey,
and
come
he's
over
right
here.
and he's
Honey,
right there.
come over here, honey. I think I found Grandma and Grandpa. You're not gonna believe
Ooh.
this one. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay,
I'm
here
sorry.
we go. No, you're right. Rick French says of the great book on the U.S. Civil War that is actually a side by side compilation of the personal diaries of two soldiers, one Union, one Confederate, as they fought up until Gettysburg. And then, how did that work out, Rick? Here he goes. One was Army of the Potomac, the other the Army of Virginia. An amazing contrast of the exact same event. One survives Gettysburg, the other doesn't. I'll try to dig out the name of the book. Okay, I'd be interested in that. I'd be interested in that, Rick.
PBS
So
did a. Go ahead. Go
so
ahead.
so basically, it's two different accounts
Mhm.
of the same heading for the same battle, and one survived and one didn't. Wow, that's
But that's
yeah,
the history. But that's what I'm. So in a way, that's what I'm trying to say. It can't. We can't take away the ultimate thing, which is what you're saying, where at school you have this remedial, and it's not going to be. Although they do in school, they did focus a little bit on things, concerning slavery
right,
and this and that. But if you think about it, or at least as far as I can remember going back, it wasn't so accentuated per se. It was just part of the thing there, more or
right.
less, with the main concept jotting forward.
Hmm.
But um, every, not every, but a lot of the historical battles and so on and so forth, going across time from ancient times on, there's always all these accounts.
Oh,
Obviously,
sure.
obviously the so you have a multi-layered picture of what went on, which is what informs people. But obviously, in given country, you know, they're not necessarily, and you can't do that to kids. It's too much
Well,
information, as
yeah,
well.
and that's what I mean. It's not in the history texts. You have to look for it. In this book, for instance, that Rick is talking about, um, I'm almost willing to guarantee you that you would not even think about a book like that until you at least got into high school level. And even then, I doubt it was taught at a high school level, more likely college, because that's when you start specializing and focusing in on things. What they taught me throughout, junior high and high school about the Civil War was basically the North won. And that was the gist of it. If you take everything that they taught, and remember, I'm going back a few years here, some of the things that led up to it, some of the things that happened afterwards, but the grand takeaway from all this was the North won, you know,
Yeah.
and they didn't spend any time at all talking about how the Union soldier fought and lived from day to day, or how the Confederate soldier fought and lived from day to day. They certainly didn't compare the marches from both sides to that decisive battle. I mean, Rick goes on, he says they even talk about how the same weather is impacting them. They didn't get into any kind of things like that because they have a limited amount of time. So they're going to present the side from the victors.
I'll give you a good example of an even smaller breakdown of the Battle of Gettysburg.
Mhm.
Um, and the concepts, the general concepts. We do have a general concept of things,
Mhm.
and people live by that in their storage memory. And anything outside that universe that they understand that was given to them through school, um, is blurry or non-existent at best. But
Mhm.
in real life, the situation was more complicated. So within that, on both the North and the South in that battle, well, on the side of the North in that battle in specific with this Gettysburg event was a gentleman by the name of Fernandez Cavada
Mhm.
or Gonzalez Cavada. And he was born in Cuba,
Mhm.
and his father was from Cantabria.
Yeah.
And he fought. He was like either a lieutenant or at, lieutenant general or lieutenant, one of the two. Um, um, During that battle, and he's recognized as by the Library of Congress, and he's so it's on official
Mhm.
direct source. Well, he was from out of Pennsylvania, and he they won
Mhm.
their skirmish against I think it was a Mississippi regiment, but he was caught and sent to a prison called
Mhm.
Libby Prison.
Yeah.
And so there's a whole story of his life within the greater Civil War thing, but the general public will not know that story and his origins.
Mhm.
Um,
Until you get into specialist study.
uh, 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 right, and so to the point where I've seen comments, because I'm focused on that, where
Sure.
people are like, "What? No, that can't be," because the assumptions are very basic.
Mhm.
People's horizons are very limited,
That's what you're
and they're
taught. Yeah.
right, but it's American history, and people that are like Americans running around and living life obviously have a whole slew of different things that they throughout their lives that they experience, but the history of America is even more complex. But no,
Oh yeah.
you can't um force or teach every detail, so it
No.
has to be left to a
Right.
situation where, if you're inclined to study such things or investigate such things, where you discover a
Mhm.
America is bigger than generally Americans think it is.
Oh
Is
yeah.
what
All of. uh,
what I've discovered.
I think it's fair to say that all of history is bigger than most people around the world think it is.
Yeah, but focus on Gettysburg.
But
Focus
yes, if you
in
want to
America.
focus on Gettysburg, yes, I mean you're absolutely right. I mean,
Yeah.
and there are lots of examples of things like that. I mean, go back to the Revolutionary War, and very few, a very small percentage of people have ever heard of Baron von Steuben. They give George Washington credit for being a brilliant military commander, and I'm not saying that he wasn't. But up until von Steuben came along, his troops were more or less a ragtag group of people who, as often as not, deserted because there was no order, there was no discipline. And von Steuben came along and taught drill and ceremony. He taught the movement of troops. He taught all of this to Washington and his commanders and the troops, and turned them into a more effective, efficient fighting force. But nobody, well, I won't say nobody, but relatively few people have ever heard of that. That it
Yeah,
took a
it's
German to come teach the Americans how to fight the British, you
yeah.
know.
There's more. If you're so right. So we agree. Obviously, there's
Oh,
so
yeah.
if you're a guy living in Sweetwater in 2023 and grew up here since the 1970s, and you experienced the exchange with kids, adults, and friends, and the stores and places and you experience that experience, you can't get any better than being a specific historian of your like of the events that occurred surrounding you. But if you
Mhm.
remove that 100 years into the future, um, people observing it then, now it's watered down to just a few iconic things, and maybe in
Yeah.
between sort of bridges that connect ideas. And in 200-300 years, it's a blur.
Well, let's come
So
back that 2 or 300 years just to 100 years out. How many people are going to know what they're looking at? It takes a guy like you who is still alive now and able to tell the story to be
yeah.
able to put it into context, because 100 years from now they'd be speculating,
Well,
you know.
just from my time prior to my being born into the 40s, there is limited. I'm sure there's more than we could, but there's limited information about Sweetwater and the people that lived here,
Mhm.
and the experiences that when this was just a tiny, tiny, tiny little thing.
Mhm.
And those were people that lived out their lives and
Mhm.
experiences and so on. And if you come here now, you walk these streets, the buildings and everything, it's a different so there is that we actually started with in the beginning,
Mhm.
where the progress of time, things may be overblown or shrunk down
Mhm.
slightly. We don't have, so there is that thing,
But
that thing, but just to tidy in these battles across history, thank goodness everybody from their respective sides were writing, and in particular Civil War with diaries and so on and so
mhm.
forth. So thank goodness that these things were occurring, because if you do have that curiosity and you are that laser focused on one topic, you can actually dig some stuff out that's not the regular,
Right.
uh, you know,
But
everyday life.
it takes people like you and your contemporaries to tell the story of Sweetwater as you grew up, because you were there. And
Right.
you have the pictures of the old footbridge. You have that context. You have
Right.
Super 8 movies that you or your dad or your grandpa or whoever took out in that area, where
Yeah.
they can see, looking across the canal. I don't know, maybe part of FIU was there, but maybe none of it was. I don't know. You were
Yeah.
there, you grew up, and you saw the expansion. But somebody coming in right now, to them, it's always been that way. And
Right.
it's up to guys like you and your contemporaries to set that record straight and say, oh no, there was a time this was a dirt road.
Yeah.
You know.
So let me go back to the thing with the key thing that I don't want to say oppose, but I wanted to expand on, which is, um what is it? History is written by the victors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my objection was that it's not nuanced enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so then that's why I gave, and now we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about the different writings and whatnot. So we explored that. Um, My issue also with that saying, not because you said it, but just the saying in general, throughout, and other sayings like it that recap an idea, is that um, is the suggestion, or that the good enough, that's good enough for people, and people have every right to say, well, that's good enough for me and stuff. Everybody has the right to whatever the hell you want, but I take exception with the. So if you ask someone what the Civil War was about, and they give you their events, and you say, "Oh, okay. Well, did you know X, Y, and Z?" and they're completely unable to process that, um, well, they have their limit, and there's always going to be something that people are unable to process. Um, so I guess my objection is with limiting, and that's a personal, not like that's my personal view. It has nothing to do with what other people should do or shouldn't do. Um, is that I can't leave it alone at just that, due to the way I explore things. So that's why I
Okay.
tacked on that thing. But again, it's just my personal way of engaging with
Well,
the
okay.
material.
If you want to get down in the weeds, you're absolutely right. People on all sides are going to write down and they're going to document things through their eyes, through their perception. But
Yeah,
that doesn't mean that's what's going to be taught.
right.
And it
Yeah, I
doesn't
agreed
and
with
it
it.
and it
I
and it
agreed with that already. Yeah.
and it doesn't matter what's written. What's taught is important. And those texts are written by the victors. Because I'll guarantee you the losing side isn't going to be taught. Not until you want to get further along and get into specialist studies, then some of that nuance will come through.
From your respective country, Mark.
Yeah,
The
from your
historic,
exactly from your respective
right,
country, and I
but
can
that's
only
an
speak
important.
for the U.S.
But
So,
that's an important. Well, you can't only speak for the U.S. You can speak for
well, yeah,
that. You can go to a library and acquire. So look,
but I
from
don't
the,
know
the
what but I don't know what history they're teaching in Mongolia.
no, no, no. But that's
So I
okay.
can't speak to that.
You have to step back.
I
No,
can
no,
speak
no.
some to Germany. I can
Yeah,
speak some to some parts of Europe that I've been to.
right. If you talk that way broadly,
Hmm.
if you say I can't know what Mongolia is teaching with, that's so broad that there's enough
Well,
wiggle room within all that. So there's nothing there
it's
in terms
because
that
it's
you
a
can.
statement of a fact. I can't tell you what they're teaching in Mongolia.
Yeah,
I
but
just don't know.
I'm trying to explain something, dude.
Okay. Well.
Okay, so when you use broad brushes,
Hmm.
it's good enough as a broad brush, and it's not accurate. Anything is right when you use a broad brush,
Sure, it's
or
accurate.
anything is easily able to fit when you use a broad brush. You could say the Civil War was fought between the North, and the South. And that's good enough. Everybody can go home now.
Is
I
that not a
understand.
fact, though? What
I
I'm getting
understand.
at, when you
Yeah.
say that I'm painting with a broad brush, you picked on that my statement about I don't know what they're teaching in Mongolia. How could I know what they're teaching in Mongolia?
Yeah, because it's a broad brush you're painting. But
But
if
it
you
also
ask,
happens to be true.
yeah, yeah, but it's true in the broadest of sense.
No, it's true in a specific downright to it. I have
No,
no idea what they're teaching in Mongolia. Fact. Punked aus. No argument. I don't
yeah,
know what they're teaching in Mongolia.
yeah, exactly. But that's such a broad thing that it's it, but
It's
if you
also a
ask the question,
fact.
but if right, but it's neither. It's fine. Like it's not really useful other than I don't know.
Hmm.
But what I'm saying, if you say that you don't that according to I don't know whatever war at sea,
Hmm.
that one country was participating in and another one was participating in,
Hmm.
you and let's say your participation from your country,
Hmm.
let's say, won,
Hmm.
and the other one lost. You don't It's true that you don't know what they teach. You
Hmm.
could assume that your country's teaching that you won, and the other one is teaching that it won it to counter.
Sure.
Or you could also assume that they're teaching that, well, we lost in this
Hmm.
battle. And the only way to know that is if you're so inclined to study those things. But these are more specific. Anything broad, like victories taught by the winners, um, anything broad like that, you're saying in terms of the country from where it's being propagated from,
Yes, it's a
not
generalization. Yes.
as a generalization, right? And so that's the only exception that I take. Generalizations don't. There's nothing there, is what I'm saying. Like it's so broad that
Um,
if someone's not curious or lazy, that's where it sits, and which is fine, but it's not, I guess, good enough for me since
okay,
you
and
know
that's your opinion, and you have every right to it, and you're welcome to have it.
right. It's just my opinion.
I see it as a simple fact. I see it as a simple fact, and you can get as nuanced as you want to, but we've had this kind of discussion before on what's good enough, and that comes down to the individual. If you're perfectly satisfied, like when I say some things don't mean anything, you're not satisfied with that because you think that there probably is or possibly is a meaning to it, and I just don't see one.
Everything
That's
you're
down to
saying right now,
that's down to personalities.
everything you're saying right now
Mhm.
is broad,
Yeah, and I don't find a problem with it
but
because it suits me.
but
You have a
you
different opinion, but they're just opinions.
but you do. So I admitted as much that it's my opinion from the beginning,
Mhm.
like from the beginning.
Mhm.
Like I can delineate what opinion is, and I can also
Sure,
delineate what broad is
I know.
and what specific is. And
Yeah,
so I'm just saying you are aware that if I were to say something in a broad sense, there's no loss and no gain in terms of you're not stretching the bounds with a broad statement.
I don't always see a need to stretch the bounds for my opinion. I don't always see a need because some things just don't interest me.
Yeah, but you brought
So,
up the topic of all this, and I'm saying that if you go to more of a nitty gritty, you're going to find that other people write histories, be it the North and the
sure they
South,
do, and a good
and
portion of it is never taught, and I said that.
within that are the details that illuminate better, not maybe not perfectly, but better a scenario. So on the on I guess on in the broad gate where everybody generally you would assume flows through,
Mhm.
everything is remedial and basic. You could
It has
assume
to be
that.
basically, yeah.
Right. So everything is remedial and basic. But when you have a basic understanding of things, you could come you could make disaster, and it's totally a person's prerogative to do so. But any broad, like if you're very detailed about your life and your experiences and your things, but not detailed of the opposite. If the United States, as an example, would not be very focused on studying their opposition in some country X, let's say,
Mhm.
and know the details culturally and the nuances and where the danger can lie and stuff, and they're going to be blindsided. And just opposite of that, Joe Public in the United States, if they have a very broad understand, it's not the fault Joe Public. It's like we said before, you can't know everything. I understand that, but since we're talking about the subject, there is nuance to these things, and I'm just saying that things could go horrible if you assume certain things because it's the broad accepted, I guess, cornerstone. Um, I think that's potential, and you want to insist on it, not you with what you said, but like let's say Joe Public insists that, well, the South and the North, and they take some weird position without knowing all the details and whatnot, or even caring. They're believing a thing that that could be problematic. I mean, there's people that are in sort of clans out there, let's say, believing all sorts of crazy crap because broadly speaking, they believe something that was handed down to them, you know, about whatever. I mean, there's people that believe all sorts of stuff,
True.
be it religious stuff or I mean, so I'm just saying that in that broad concept of everything around people, there's room for, and that's where
But
but
there's
my
also
personal that was where my personal thing was saying, well, okay, but we do have documents from other people, so we can get a better. So
but
that's
I stand
kind
by
of where
my
I was going.
statement. But I stand by my statement because it's not taught. It's
No,
not
no,
taught.
I agree
Okay.
with you.
So
I totally
so
agree with you.
that's
I
why I
do.
stand by that statement. I mean,
No, no,
and
I
yes,
agree
you
with.
could and yes, you could get down in the weeds. And a lot of times you have to get down in the weeds because
If you're capable
it
and interested,
well,
right?
no, if you have an interest. If what I mean by that is if it's crucial that you need the knowledge. I'll give you an example, the Cold War. We needed to know as much about the Soviet Union as we could. And the only way we could get that was paying people out on the street to give us information and various other methods, of course. But they were a closed society and we had very little information about them, but we needed as much information as we could get. But we had to prioritize what that information was. It didn't matter to us what color Vladimir's walls were. What was important to us was what was on the notepad in his desk. So, how deep you get in the weeds depends upon the priority, what you're looking for, and how you plan on getting it. So, yes, there were diaries written by millions of people, probably billions of people over the centuries. And some of that information is extreme. Well, all of it's valuable in and of itself. But as far as changing a narrative or changing a perception of history, some of it may absolutely do that. Some of it may be the nonsensical ravings of a farmer who's cheesed off that three pigs got away. So just because it was written at the time doesn't necessarily change anything, is what I'm getting at here. So, yes, we can branch off into other interests, and we should branch off into those other interests. And that's what I'm trying to say with this entire thing is we have history happening right now that we're documenting haphazardly. And it takes guys like you who are researching your family, and without knowing it, you're researching other families. Or maybe you do know it by now. You're also researching families that aren't related to you. And some of that information is going up as well because you have found it. And maybe it doesn't have a direct connection with your family, but the fact that it exists, somebody else in another family now has a resource. And it's because you dug it out and maybe you translated it and you put a lot of stuff up on the Internet Archive that other people can now access. That's crucial. That kind of thing is crucial because you're absolutely right. History is being written every day. And it's up to the people who document that, collate that, and put it on this repository that we're calling the internet now, the world's grandest library. It's crucial that that information go there.
Yeah, obviously not everybody can, nor is it favorable to, nor is it reasonable that everybody in a society is going to be focused or yeah, focused in whatever thing. I mean, in order for us to even exist, to even be able to, like, let's say, do this show, there needs to be people out there that are computer, code makers.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be people that work on electricity to power grid our the country, the states and country and so on. There has to be people that produce the food. Like, there's all this thing that we sit here, we sit here due to all sorts of things coming to a balance so that we're able to comfortably
Mm-hmm.
interact in this. So it's all needed,
Mm-hmm.
and um, one has to sort of understand that um, you know everybody has their like things that they focus on, and it's all
Mm-hmm.
important to someone at some point somehow, and having those resources and people sort of like little ants going off and exploring different things
Right.
be it like clothing trends, like what you may think it's
Yeah,
used.
even that.
So there's a spider's web of activity with humans in a given generation and across generations, and it's all useful and it's all necessary in order for it to do whatever the heck it does. So
E-
that is true.
and in ways that we may not even realize ourselves. I mean, you have posted a few pictures of your, I believe he's your great uncle or great great uncle, Mateo.
Yes.
There may be people researching him, writing another biography. There may be somebody coming around from another angle who is studying the clothing of the age and using that photo
Right.
as an example. There are people out there that do that because they follow the textile industry or they want to follow a specific manufacturer. I mean, something as innocent as a picture of your father standing out in the street. Somebody sees the shoes he's wearing. Aha, there's an example of those shoes I was trying to talk about. I mean, it could be something as innocent as that.
I'll give you an example using myself as the ignorant one,
Mhm.
not only for effect but for humility on my part. Um, so obviously we all can't know everything, and we mention that
Sure.
often.
Mhm.
So that's a given. But there's more to know than what we think we know.
Oh, yes,
And
always.
to put up walls for the sake of the wall, and to box ourselves in with what we feel comfortable,
Mhm.
I don't feel that, in my opinion, is the, I don't know, effective, intelligent thing to do. But then again, horses for courses, everybody to themselves.
Mhm.
It's kind of like when people say, when they do those street interviews where they try to do geography with Americans,
Yeah,
and they don't know where the heck anything
yeah.
whatsoever is
They
on the map.
they can't find Albania on the map. These
So
dumb Americans.
right, it's that thing. Now,
Mhm.
I am quite sure there's plenty beyond the people that they interview that would not. I don't know this for a fact, but if I had to bet money, I would say that there's a slew of people, to whatever degree there is, that could not point out much.
Utah.
But that's my assumption.
Yeah.
With that said, to the what I was going to say. So back when the Twin Towers,
Mhm.
and I was out in the Everglades, everybody was high strung at the time,
Mhm.
and I had some like Middle Eastern people that had come through and stuff, and we were talking politics and stuff. And I was much younger, like 20 some years, and no, because George Bush, the person said, and I said, well, yeah, and I'll tell you what the reason is. Because this way we do battle over there and we keep all the our oil reserves so we don't have to use it for generations, and I rattled off this whole series of things in order to what's the word, anchor our position,
Mhm.
as opposed to those that were incoming, trying to overtake, let's say.
Mhm.
I was trying to stake out, and I
Yeah.
did so pretty. And the guy's face was like he was looking at me and stuff. And so my reaction to him wasn't was informed to the point of what I was seeing on the news at the time.
Yeah. You hadn't dug deeper. Yeah. And 99% of people, I would venture to say, do the same thing. They
But you
don't
see what I'm
investigate
saying?
for themselves. I do, yes, and that is one of the common themes that I probably preach too much on these episodes. Is that we are a product of that, and never trust a single source, because I've had those same opinions. Now I'm skeptical. I'm automatically skeptical, and I
In order
look.
to in
But
order to in order to even begin to under in order to even begin to understand how grave the situation, For me,
Mm-hmm.
everybody else can be quite content, but
Mm-hmm.
but for me, I've run across an issue, and there's two things to that. So number one, I'll tell you the issue,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll say, believe it or not, regardless of our interactions today, earlier today or last evening, thinking in advance of the show,
Mm-hmm.
I was going to mention, I was going to bring up, or I had in my mind wanting to bring up the "and now what" again. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason I wanted to bring it up was because I felt it was important to revisit and give it its rightful place as
Mm-hmm.
a viable understanding, because it gets to a point, and I, even though we had our discussions and you brought a little bit of it up today, but even though we've had conversations on that topic, and I stake my place on my understanding
Mm-hmm.
and what I find are shortcomings in your understanding on that topic of "and now what," even though at the time we're doing that, afterwards I take that with me and I mull it over, because I do. I
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
mull
I
it,
know you do.
and the reason, and so the reason, which you know, because I mention it a lot, but it, it has to have its value. Let's see what that is, but let's work on it. So I had thought to bring over that and revisit it to give it its rightful value, because here's the problem: that at some point, I think it's you're right. No matter how much one may acquire knowledge on, and we
Mm-hmm.
can't help ourselves. I can't help but be who I am
Yeah.
um, at this time. But
Right.
I'm also aware that there's a possible future time and there's a
Sure.
possible past time. I can see what I lacked in the past. So, um, um, not everybody is capable
Right.
or entertain or willing to entertain, and so on. So, I looked at it and I thought to myself, at some point, every book that's going to be read has been read. Every movie that could be watched has has been watched. Every At some point, you have to give it a rest. I thought that because we're not perpetual
Right.
human beings. Information is exponential,
Right.
and there's no
There's no
reality.
end to it.
Right. There's no reality in which I, and I know this, but I'm saying to filter it through, that I can acquire all knowledge of the past,
Mm-hmm.
all knowledge of the present, um, have it constant in your head, so that one can have a clearer picture of this. And even if you have a clearer picture at the end of the day,
Now what?
right, exactly. And
Yeah.
so, in order to give that its rightful place, I was going to bring that, but we went through all this
Well,
stuff, and I
but no,
forgot
but
about it and all that.
I'm with you. But let me try to uh, clarify a little bit.
It's
One.
not unreasonable. Before you say it's not, mind you, it's actually not unreasonable. I don't think,
Mm-hmm.
because in many cases, as an example, my father would have, even though he, explored all that he did, in some instances, he was kind of like, now what? Just, because
Well.
at some point, you have to sort of like deal with the fact that um, we have to deal with what we got, and we're
Mm-hmm.
limited. So it's not so
Well, but
that's where I was,
let me do a little bit of clarification here. Usually, when I say, "Okay, now what I mean is in the sense of I've acknowledged everything that you've said. So where do we go from here? What's next? Where do we go from here? That's usually what I mean when I say, okay, now what?
so maybe I took it to the extreme.
Well, maybe I was being too literal, but that's what I mean is like, okay, I agree with that. I get it. I understand. Where do we go from here? What is the end goal here? Now what? What do we do? So let's fix it. If it can be fixed, let's fix it. If it needs to be changed, let's change it. How do we proceed? Where do we go from here? Now what? You know,
So the
it's
other
kind of like the scientist, or not scientist, the mathematician, and I think it was Bertram Russell, who went through this entire logic experiment and came out with an equation in, I want to say, the early 1960s that proved 1 + 1 = 2. He proved it without a doubt. Okay, I think it's a little bit late for that exercise because by that time, we've got a lot riding on the fact that 1 and 1 is 2. So if we find out that 1 and 1 is not 2, now what do we do?
Mhm.
So you get to that point to where you accept what is, you acknowledge what is, you confirm what is through your studies, through your knowledge, through your observation. Now, where do we proceed? How do we proceed?
Well, you're being more nuanced and
Do we
careful.
do we want to proceed? Maybe we should back off and leave it alone. It's kind of like, all right, there's a volcano and it's setting lava our direction. Now what? What do we do? Where do we go? We know we can't go that way because that's where the volcano is. Where do we go? Where do we go from here?
Well, so okay, so now you're being more nuanced with the now what,
Well, I
but
actually thought about it a little bit more as we sit here.
well, so uh, and this is for whoever, I mean, take it for what it's worth. The problem as I see it, well, number one, there is no problem. There just is what
Yeah.
it is.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, but with that to the side, because that's ultimately, I mean, we could be
Yeah.
doing this, or we could be talking about poker playing in a Las Vegas casino. We could be talking about anything, and it's all basic. If you think of it in terms of relative to
Mm-hmm.
people talking whatever the heck they talk anyhow in the breadth of time that existence is for individuals. It could be, we could be talking about pool cleaning implements, and
Mm-hmm.
we just so but on account of we are who we are, and we're here now in this fashion and this and that, and talking about these things and have a certain understanding to a certain degree. I'll say the problem that I see, if it is a problem, is that um so if I take myself,
Mm-hmm.
and for whatever reason I have the curiosities that I do,
Mm-hmm.
what's the benefit, what's the drawback? I don't know what the hell, but I just do. It's like a little rat that goes through a maze. So talking about
Mm-hmm.
mazes, um life, or thinking, and all the stuff that is around us is kind of like a maze. And when that maze, you start entering that maze, there's forks in the road that
Mm-hmm.
multiply exponentially, um, on any given topic, which goes back to the now what. And we
Mm-hmm.
have touched on this because
Yeah.
you could likewise go so deep in the weeds that the maze is
And and
ever
explore every corner of the maze.
right. So now it's all a frickin' maze
Mm-hmm.
anyhow. And we can only go down one road at a time, even though
Right.
we may think that we can go down multiple roads. And so the issue is this: when I have something present in my mind, and
Mm-hmm.
I offer it up to you, and you receive that, but let's say you have something present in your mind, or you
Mm-hmm.
have a variation on the theme,
Mm-hmm.
and then the exchange begins. Even that is a localized back and
Sure.
forth that is within the great expanse of this mind, or this maze.
It's an exchange of ideas.
But
But
we're stuck. So we're stuck,
yes,
in a sense,
right.
regardless of what we do.
But when we get to the end of that maze and we get the piece of cheese in our hands, now what?
We never get to the end, though.
Now what? We're going to get to the end.
Not of the maze.
Sure, we are.
We're gonna
In,
clunk down
our,
somewhere in one of those
exact, and
passages.
that's the end of the maze. That we're gonna when they throw dirt in our face, that's the end of the maze.
Yeah, I
Now
mean,
what? And we don't know.
right. So I mean, that's about all you
Now,
can say. That solves everything in a nutshell.
I have an unpopular opinion on something. because you were talking about, modern history. I was talking about modern history and this, that, and the other, and where do we go, and now what? And today in history, balloons. I have an unpopular opinion.
Balloons, like in flying over America.
Uh huh.
Oh, okay.
Why are we worried about that?
It's entertainment.
It's 100% entertainment. I think what it is people needed something to get upset about, because we can focus our attention on one balloon,
Mhm.
but we totally ignore the hundreds of daily flights of aircraft that can carry much bigger, more sophisticated equipment than that balloon ever could have.
And worse than that, we can talk about the hundreds and thousands of flights, whatever the number might be, of people that come here from China or other places that are spies that have been infiltrated. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, so so in terms of that,
Mm-hmm.
because so in the 1990s there were Cuban spies
Oh yeah.
in the no no working in the
Mm-hmm.
Pentagon.
Yeah.
How did they get from somewhere in Havana to in the Pentagon? What that process was. And there's not just that. There are people in universities, there's
Mm-hmm.
people that are plotting at every turn. These are
Mm-hmm.
assumptions, but there's past
But
references
yeah,
of
there's history that proves that you're absolutely right about that.
so a balloon, and I did a little video mock-up as
Mm-hmm.
well. It's entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
But just like
Well.
political satire drawings of the past,
Mm-hmm.
and probably the present. I'm sure they still exist. Political satire drawings in this net. It conveys a general message that enforces certain beliefs from one group that's opposed to the character being portrayed,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that's how that works. Like
We.
this guy with the red hair, or
Mm-hmm.
the other one with like the Pocahontas thing, or those are all little cultural nuggets for political purposes.
Yeah. We all don't. Most of us won't admit it, but we all have to have that one little moment of righteous indignation. I can't believe they would do this and yada, yada, yada. Dude, don't worry about that balloon. They've got airplanes flying over all the time, and we let them land at our airports. People get on, people get off, they go back and forth, carrying much more sophisticated spying equipment than that balloon could ever carry. But we're going to get up shook about a balloon. We're going to ignore all the airplanes in the sky. It's
Well,
an
no,
easy target. It's an easy way for us to get that righteous indignation and get our blood fired up and then go on with our lives.
but at the same time, at the same flip side of it,
Mm-hmm.
this is a country.
Mm-hmm.
There is a geographic border to it.
Yes.
There's an airspace. That
Yes.
is a balloon with power, solar power things the size of I don't know how many buses
Yes.
supposedly, and it is flying overhead.
Yes.
And so screw that,
Yes. I
you know.
agree.
So there's that.
It was odd. Again, it was out of place. It was odd. You
But
know.
just because,
Now,
just because, just to say something about what Doctoral just said there, gotta keep the masses distracted while you're fleecing them. Okay, so then
there's a
there's
lot to that too.
well, but so I take a different position, although I agree. See, the
Mhm.
problem is this: you there's so the problem is this: how many people out there understand that there's two to three to four to five things going on at the same time, and that's the case? I'm not. I don't know what the numbers are. I'm sure there's many that are just looking at the pretty glittery thing, but
Mhm.
I'm sure that there's tons of people that are juggling three, four, five different concepts at the same time as
Mhm.
well. But
Mhm.
then we have the problem that all societies have, that we're at the behest in a way of the powers that be, because there's a machine that's been set up a long
Mhm.
time ago, and there you have another scenario where people are kind of I mean, what are you going to do? You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely. And Dockrell, he expands on it. If the general population is fighting amongst themselves, they're too busy to look at what is really happening. How many times have I said a variation of that
but even if they
in
let's
in
say
in in our little background talks? Generally, not on the channel.
but let's say every so number one, there's nothing. So look, that is
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
so
Look
look.
over here. Look over here, so you don't see what this one's doing.
Yeah, but here's the problem.
It's a
I don't.
cynical approach, but yeah,
No. I understand. I agree to a degree, but I'm saying that who it's here's the problem I have. I refuse to think and believe that Mark Lindsay, Doc Roll, the few of us here, myself, can see that, but yet the majority of the public at large cannot. I can't accept it, number one, not because I don't think all of us have our brilliance,
I
but
believe I agree with you.
okay, so I have that problem with it.
I agree with you, but you don't need the majority. You
No,
just need enough. You
I
just need enough.
I know you just need enough. So that goes to what our Canadian buddy from Manitoba once explained, which it's one of the most brilliant concepts. I know he probably didn't come up with it. Maybe he did. Oh, there he is. There he is. Snow Crusher. Um,
Mhm.
I don't even. I'm not even joking about this. I just find it so ridiculously awesome. And I'll repeat it. He said, I asked one time when we were all discussing, and I said, dude, I can't believe that these freaking people would send me an email that says, "Oh, I'm a Nigerian prince, and all I need is X amount, and I'll double you down with the money, and you'll be okay." And this, and that. And then I was discussing with everybody, and I said, I don't understand why waste your time with this, because there's no way in my right mind. I mean, it's difficult for me to drop a quarter in a bubble gum machine,
Mhm.
so let alone give up this Nigerian prince any frickin'. I mean, get out
Mhm.
of here, buddy.
Yep.
And so Snow Crusher then said something to the effect of, "Well, listen, they don't," which is reiterating what you just said. Now they don't need um, everybody. They just need people that are gullible
Yeah.
enough to go through with the process. So in order to
Yeah.
weed people out, they just
Right.
roll out this just most stupid thing
Right.
that's so obvious. And so that whole concept, I think it's one of the brilliant moments in history there, Snow Crush. And it came
Yeah.
from Manitoba. It came from Manitoba. But the reason I think it's brilliant is because of what it is. And I think that applies to what you're saying as far as the public, and what
Exactly.
Doc is saying in the public at large.
Exactly. They don't need the majority of people to believe it. They just need enough.
Right.
They
It
just
sounds
need
fair.
enough.
It,
Hmm.
it sounds fair to me. And but to be
And
fair, we're all. I can't talk. I don't. I'm constantly in small ways and maybe great ways due to that maze we were talking about. Constantly trying to find my footing on all sorts of different things due to the complex nature of it.
okay.
Because what seems simple is sometimes not simple at all.
Hmm.
You can have your base understanding and stick with that. That's why a lot of people stick to their guns, because there's too much incoming and attempts to
Right.
change one's mind.
And
So
if
they
you,
figure, let's just hunker down on this.
and when you're
But
trying to navigate that maze, if you try to go down every single little avenue to try to find your way out, sometimes you find yourself getting further and further and further away from the path that you set out for. You know, it's kind of like chasing numbers. You want to make something. Well, you can start down the you want to make a table. You can start down the rabbit hole of what kind of wood. and maybe you've made a decision there, then you can get down the rabbit hole of the right type of tools. And you can spend months doing that and work yourself into such a frenzy on trying to get everything just perfect that the table never gets built because you're too far off in the weeds. You've lost the direction and the table never gets made. And believe me, I'm an expert at that. I am an expert at getting down in the weeds and forgetting that the goal was to do this. I want to put a nail in the wall. Let me go research nails. Now I got to go research hammers. Now, how do I hold that hammer? Do I use my fingers? No, it's a short nail. Maybe I want to get a pair of needle nose pliers and hold it like that, tap it into the wall, and then hit. Meanwhile, the nail still ain't in the damn wall. And I got somebody behind me tapping her toes because she wants to hang up this picture. Well, you get on with it and put a stinking nail in the wall, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
But
again, it's we're
and
one
and
maze. Go ahead.
and we get into that. You don't need everybody. You don't even need a majority. You just need enough. That's what I mean when I talk about the noisy 1%.
I do want to talk about. So yeah, I agree. Or it sounds reasonable to me that it makes sense. I don't
Mhm.
know ultimately what the hell, but yeah,
Yeah.
I do want to balance out um, with a bit of Snow Crusher's shortcomings,
Uh-oh.
which because nobody can be 100% on. So his movie options and focal point
Yeah. I agree.
have much left to be desired.
Got to
So
broaden those horizons.
yeah, he tanks on that number.
Hmm.
Musically, he may have some redeeming qualities here and there, but his negation of things like the Beatles are unacceptable. So in balance, the good part is not enough to lift him up, from all the negatives. So unfortunately, Greg, I'm
Well,
gonna have to pull back a little bit of that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
Unless you watch 12 episodes, 12 seasons of The Walking Dead back to back, then then you'll be on good footing.
yeah. And on that happy note, we need to land the plane. It's been 2 hours.
He says, in your opinion, yeah, I have no problem with the. I don't know why people.
Well,
So look, one of the
it's
easiest
the
things
only
for me.
opinion that counts.
One of the easiest things for me is to. It wasn't always easy because one wants to have absolutes and stuff, but yeah, it's my opinion. That's
Hmm.
all it is.
Yeah, and it's the only one that matters.
No, not to me. It's not the only one that matters. I mean, it's mostly the one that matters because I've arrived at
Well,
it
you
for
have
what
to
it is.
live with it. So
Right, right.
yes, it is the one that matters.
Um, whoa, the only thing that they agree on is Greg's shortcomings.
Now, we don't necessarily agree on that either. Can't wait
No,
until they talk about me.
no, and
Well,
I'm slightly tongue in cheek here.
now,
Obviously, come
Rick, it's too early to talk about you. You know, we've known Greg for several years. I mean, I've known you for I think going on a year now, maybe a little bit more than that. So it's still a little, you get to know somebody a little bit more and a little bit better before you drop to the ground and fake having a seizure, you know?
I do want to say one final thing, and due to the everyone's participation. I do want to thank everyone for the participation this evening, and I do want to say that we did take count and did a random lottery drawing, and Snow Crusher has come up the winner. So we have this incredible thing here, and this is Toe Jam Football Cream. We're gonna send you a full can of this stuff, and you just you just rub it up in there,
Yeah.
rub it up in there.
It's
You
good
just
for toenail fungus, athlete's foot,
rub it up in there,
and it's good on rye toast.
rub it up in there.
Yeah. Toe Jam football cream at your local retailer.
All right, enough of that. Um, we want to thank you guys for hanging out with us. We go live every Tuesday at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific Coast time here on the Trampled Underfoot podcast channel on YouTube. We do have a website, and the website is trampledunderfootpodcast.com. And if you hover over there, there's a button called the Wayback Machine button. You can catch some of our past episodes. You could download them and listen to them in your leisure time. And we have a site where Mark later on is going to post some of the videos that he had mentioned in the earlier part of our conversation this evening, which should be interesting because it's like that, specific footage and whatnot. So I think that that'll be interesting. So you can go over to Facebook at Trampled Underfoot Podcast on Facebook. And we're also sponsored by
Harneal Media. You see him out here in the chat with us every Tuesday. You see him in a bunch of other live streams all over YouTube. You see him all over the internet. And there's a reason for that. Steve is good at what he does, and he does it very, very well. Now, this is just you and me talking here. Let me kind of cozy up to the microphone here and just you and me here. If you are looking to create or increase your web presence, there is no better way than to have a website. And if you don't know what the heck you're doing with a website, if you've never thought about a website before, or if you've considered it in the past, talk to Steve over at Harneal Media. He is the man, the myth, the legend. He can square you away. He can do as much or as little as you like. He can take care of the whole thing, from designing and getting everything up and running to creating a web store for you to list your items or your services. I can't sing his praises enough. He is the sponsor of trampledunderfootpodcast.com. He always does us right. Check him out. You will find a link to Harneal Media down in the description box of this video and all of our past episodes. Check him out. That's harnealmedia.com, sponsor of trampledunderfootpodcast.com.
All right. And none of the opinions, philosophical whatnots expressed this evening or in the past 121 episodes of the Trampled Underfoot podcast show are what would be the way to wrap that? The opinions of our sponsors, nor endorsed in any such way, nor here within the bounds of the United States of America or its foreign possessions or any other country that one might consider.
That's right.
Here in the past or in the future, in any way whatsoever.
The views expressed on this podcast in no way reflect the management of the Trampled Underfoot podcast or its sponsors or affiliates.
Yeah. All right, guys, listen. Did we make it clear or what? There is no legal recourse that you can possibly. Folks, thank you for.
Don't do that, man. Somebody will go, challenge accepted.
That's right. That's right. So, anyways, on behalf of Mark Lindsay and myself, Toe Jam Football Cream, we want to thank you, wish you the best this week, and be safe. Enjoy yourselves. See you.
Peace. Get it into the frame. Peace. There we go.